The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, casting a stark white glow over the courtroom. The air was thick with tension, an unspoken energy that made the wooden benches feel harder, the space more suffocating. It wasn't just the weight of the legal proceedings that pressed down. It was something else, a silent expectation, a quiet dismissal, the kind that black women like Angela Monroe had learned to recognize all too well. She sat alone at the defendant's table, her back straight, her face unreadable. She had faced worse before, much worse. But still there was something uniquely dehumanizing about standing in a courtroom, being judged before a word was spoken. Angela had walked into this courthouse with a purpose, but now, all she could feel were the stares, the kind that said, "You don't belong here," the kind that peeled away layers of dignity with every passing second. She wasn't a stranger to judgment, whether it was in the streets, in boardrooms, or now in front of a smirking judge who barely spared her a glance. Judge Randall Harding leaned back in his chair, his lips curled into an almost amused smirk as he adjusted his glasses. He was the kind of man who had spent years in the system, growing comfortable in his position of power, comfortable enough that he didn't bother to mask his condescension. He folded his hands. "Miss Monroe, you do understand the severity of the charges against you, correct?" His voice was slow, deliberate, carrying that same patronizing tone she had encountered more times than she could count. Angela met his gaze without flinching. "I do, Your Honor." Her voice was firm, controlled. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her shrink. But Harding wasn't interested in fairness. He had already decided how this was going to go. A chuckle escaped his lips as he flipped through the paperwork in front of him. "Interesting case we have here." He glanced up, giving her a once-over like she was something mildly amusing. "Tell me, Miss Monroe, what exactly were you thinking when you walked into—" He paused, suppressing a chuckle. "Restricted government property?" A few muffled snickers echoed from the courtroom gallery. Angela didn't turn her head, but she felt their eyes, the disapproval, the doubt. She inhaled slowly. This was all a game to them, a spectacle. The judge leaned forward as if expecting her to stumble over her words. "Unless, of course, you'd like to enlighten us?" His smirk deepened, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the desk. Angela felt her jaw tighten, her pulse steady. They had no idea who they were dealing with. From the corner of her eye, she saw the prosecutor shift, slightly adjusting his tie. Even he wasn't expecting her to put up much of a fight. The public defender assigned to her case sat silently beside her, offering no real support. He had barely spoken to her before they stepped into the courtroom. Another cog in the machine. Another person who had already decided her fate before hearing the facts. Angela took a deep breath. She could end this right now. She could shut them all up in a second. But she waited. She let the silence hang for just a moment longer. Let them believe their own narrative. Then, with deliberate calm, she reached into her blazer and pulled out a badge. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. A golden shield gleamed under the harsh lights, the letters unmistakable. United States Secret Service. Judge Harding's smirk froze. His fingers, once drumming the table in amusement, stiffened. His eyes darted to the badge, then back to Angela's face. The color drained from his cheeks. Angela tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Would you like me to repeat the question, Your Honor?" And just like that, the balance of power shifted. The silence in the courtroom felt suffocating. The gleam of Angela Monroe's United States Secret Service badge had erased every smug assumption that had filled the room moments ago. The quiet hum of whispered disbelief rippled through the gallery, and for the first time since she had stepped foot in this courthouse, all eyes were truly on her. But this time, they weren't looking through her. Judge Harding sat frozen, his fingers curling against the bench, his once confident smirk wiped clean. He had laughed at her, mocked her, treated her presence as nothing more than a punchline to an unspoken joke. But now, faced with the reality of his miscalculation, he looked almost pale. Angela didn't move. Years of training had taught her the power of stillness. In this moment, she knew the weight of her silence spoke louder than any words she could say. She had learned that lesson a long time ago, from a woman who had raised her to be unshakable. You don't get the luxury of mistakes, baby girl. You don't get to be average. You walk into a room and you better be twice as good, twice as sharp, 'cause they'll be looking for a reason to cut you down before you even open your mouth. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a memory, so sharp it almost felt like she was back home, sitting at the kitchen table listening to her mother recount another long shift at the hospital. Her mother had seen it all, the exhaustion, the microaggressions, the constant battle to be seen as competent in a world that wanted her to be small, and she had made sure her daughter would never bow to that. Angela had carried that lesson through every room she had ever walked into. Through college, where professors questioned whether she really belonged in their advanced courses. Through Secret Service training, where she had to work twice as hard to prove she wasn't a Tom diversity hire. Through the long nights on stakeouts, the tense moments where her decisions meant the difference between life and death, she had built herself into something unshakable. And yet, even now, even in a room where she should have been treated with the respect she had earned, she had still been reduced to just another black woman they thought they could dismiss. Judge Harding cleared his throat, clearly trying to regain some of his authority. "Miss Monroe." He caught himself forcing a tight-lipped smile. "Agent Monroe, would you care to explain why you were on restricted federal property?" Angela studied him, her expression unreadable. She could explain everything. She could tell them that she had been on an undercover assignment, following a lead that was deemed classified. She could outline in detail why her presence there was not only justified but necessary. But that wasn't the point. The point was that Harding hadn't cared about facts before. He hadn't been interested in justice. Angela let the silence stretch just a little longer, let him feel the discomfort he had been so quick to dismiss before. "I'd be happy to clarify everything," she finally said, voice smooth, unwavering. "But first, I'd like to know something." Harding's brows knitted together. "Know what?" Angela tilted her head slightly. "Why was my case treated like a joke?" The question landed like a slap. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Harding's face darkened. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Angela's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable steel underneath. "When I walked in here, you were laughing. Why?" The prosecutor shifted in his seat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. The whispers in the gallery had died down, leaving behind a thick, tense silence. Harding stiffened. "I think you're misinterpreting." "No, I'm not." Her words cut through the room like a blade. Angela watched as Harding's fingers twitched slightly, his mouth pressing into a tight line. He had no real answer. He knew it. She knew it. Everyone knew it. Before he could fumble for a response, the door at the back of the courtroom opened. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside, his presence shifting the air instantly. Angela didn't have to turn around to know who he was. She had been expecting this. The prosecutor's expression shifted from discomfort to outright fear. Harding's eyes darted to the man in the suit, then back to Angela. The whispers started again, this time laced with something new. Concern. The man walked forward with a controlled, purposeful stride. When he reached the prosecutor's table, he leaned down, whispering something into the attorney's ear. The prosecutor's face went completely pale. Harding's lips parted, but no words came out. The confidence, the condescension, all of it was gone. Angela remained seated, her back straight, her expression unreadable. She had tipped the first domino, and whatever happened next, it was going to change everything. The air in the courtroom had shifted. The presence of the man in the dark suit had sent a ripple of tension through the space, like the tightening of a noose. Angela didn't move, didn't react outwardly. But she could feel the energy around her growing thick with uncertainty. The power dynamics that had seemed so set in stone just moments ago were shifting beneath Harding's feet, and he knew it. Judge Harding tried to mask his unease, but Angela saw the way his fingers clenched slightly, his jaw tightening with every second of silence that stretched between them. He had laughed at her before, mocked her, treated her like an inconvenience. But now, that laugh had dried up. The weight of her badge, her truth, was pressing down on him. The man in the dark, suit straightened, giving the prosecutor a hard, unreadable look before turning toward Angela. His voice was smooth but edged with something sharp. "Agent Monroe." Angela finally acknowledged him, meeting his gaze. "Director Shaw." Shaw's arrival was no accident. He was high up in the Secret Service, one of the few people who understood exactly why she had been on that federal property. If he was here now, it meant this case was no longer just a courtroom sideshow. It was something much bigger. Harding exhaled sharply, the sound of someone realizing too late that they had walked into the wrong fight. "Is there something I should be aware of?" Shaw didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a document onto the prosecutor's table, a red seal on the front. "Confidential." The prosecutor hesitated, his fingers twitching before he finally picked it up. Angela watched as his face lost all color. Harding's impatience cracked. "What the hell is going on?" Shaw's voice was calm, controlled. "Judge Harding, I suggest you tread carefully. Agent Monroe is not someone you want to mishandle." Angela didn't blink. She wasn't surprised. Shaw wasn't here just to get her out of this. He was here because something much bigger was happening. Something that had just put a target on her back in a way she wasn't sure she was ready for. Harding's face twisted with frustration. This was a man who wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by a black woman he had just been laughing at. He wasn't ready to let go of control so easily. Angela could see it in his posture, the way he leaned forward slightly as if daring her to push him further. "Fine, Agent Monroe," he said, his voice tight with forced politeness. "Since we're now acknowledging your credentials, would you like to clarify why you were trespassing on federal property?" Angela let the words sink in. Trespassing. Even now, even after everything, Harding was still trying to twist the narrative. Still trying to diminish her. She took a breath, steadying herself. She had been here before, not in this exact moment, but in these battles. In rooms where men like Harding had tried to make her small. She thought of her mother again. Of the nights she had sat at the kitchen table, books spread out in front of her, exhaustion weighing her down. "They will try to push you out. But you hold your ground, Angie. You hear me? You hold your damn ground." Angela's fingers rested lightly on her badge. "She wasn't going to shrink. I was there on an active investigation," she said evenly. "A classified operation." Harding scoffed. "Classified? How convenient." Angela didn't flinch. "I can have the report sent to your chambers, if you'd like. But considering the nature of my assignment, you might want to reconsider whether you really want that information on record." A flicker of hesitation crossed Harding's face. Angela watched him closely. She could feel on it now, the realization creeping in. He had made a mistake, a serious one. And the worst part? He hadn't even bothered to find out who he was dealing with before deciding she was beneath him. But even in his discomfort, he wasn't done fighting back. Harding straightened, reaching for the only weapon he had left. Control. "Regardless of your position, Agent Monroe, you still entered restricted property, without proper clearance. That's a legal matter, one I have every right to preside over." Angela knew what he was doing. He had lost the battle of town perception, but now he was trying to dig his claws into technicalities, trying to find any excuse to remind her that, badge or not, she was still at the mercy of his courtroom. The tension in the air sharpened. Shaw, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke. "Judge Harding, you're overstepping." His voice was quiet, but the warning was clear. Harding's eyes flicked toward him, but Angela could see it. The resentment simmering beneath the surface. He didn't like being challenged, didn't like being told he was wrong. And now his anger wasn't just about the case. It was about her. Angela had seen that look before. She had seen it in training when she outperformed men who thought they were entitled to be better than her. She had seen it in briefings when she was the only woman in the room who had a real voice. She had seen it from men who hated losing to someone like her. Angela felt a deep, steady anger settle in her bones. She had spent her entire career earning her place. And yet men like Harding would never see her as anything more than an anomaly, a black woman who got too far, too fast. Harding exhaled sharply, his grip on the gavel tightening. Very well. If Agent Monroe's superiors are here to speak on her behalf, then I see no reason to continue this hearing. The words were polished, professional, but Angela caught the bitterness buried underneath. Because this wasn't about the law for Harding, this was about ego, about power, and the fact that he had lost it. Angela didn't look away. She held his gaze, letting him sit in his own discomfort. Harding finally looked down, shuffling papers with unnecessary force. This court is adjourned. The gavel slammed her tea down sharp and final. The room buzzed with whispered conversations as people began filing out. Angela stood slowly, rolling her shoulders back. Shaw stepped closer to her, his voice low. You just made an enemy. Angela let out a slow breath, glancing at Harding as he retreated toward his chambers. He was never going to be an ally. Shaw gave a small nod. Watch your back. Angela didn't need the warning, because she already knew this wasn't Ma and over. If anything, it was just the beginning.